revved my engine a little bit. I don't know if that's the right metaphor or not.
I don't know why, but I'm not comfortable with you saying that. Welcome to another episode of the Nerd You're Looking For podcast, a nerd culture podcast that discusses nerddom through various segments. My name is Tyler Hunt, and I am alongside my co-host, as always, Pat Kuhn. How's it going, dude?
It's going well, man. It's kind of weird recording this on Monday because we usually release the episodes on Monday. I mean, we are going to release this episode on Monday, but it just kind of feels weird because we usually record like Sunday morning, or we used to record like Friday night, Saturday afternoon. I think this is definitely the latest we've recorded an episode and still put it out on time.
Oh, for sure. It does feel weird. I'm typically not off on Mondays, but luckily I had a vacation day today, so it works out. My parents were in town this weekend, so I couldn't record. I didn't want to step away and be a poor host, I guess. So it's probably good we waited this late because I'm getting over a cold, actually. So sorry if there's any sniffles or if I sound too congested or anything out there, but I'm pretty much over it at this point, so I'm feeling a lot better.
Well, that's good. And I will like to just kind of start off the podcast by apologizing as well. Apparently somebody's getting a new roof put in or something, one of my neighbors, and so I almost guarantee you're going to be able to hear some banging at one point, and then my dogs will probably start barking because, you know, my dogs are big badasses that have to protect us. I mean, that's a joke for those that don't know. My dogs, I have 2 Chihuahuas, so they weigh like 20 pounds between the two of them, so they're not monsters at all. They're just little assholes that like to bark at everybody. So I apologize if we do hear that, the banging, and then, of course, the dogs barking, and maybe me screaming at my dogs because it's super, super annoying.
This has the potential to be a shit show, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what we get for waiting till Monday morning. Nothing ever goes right on Mondays.
For sure. All right, so let's just jump right into the episode. If this is your first episode, we start off each episode by kind of just checking in with each other. We call it what we're into. So what are you into this week?
So Netflix is becoming a pretty big place for stand-up comics to release new specials, which has been pretty cool. I've talked about a few over the last couple years as they've released, and this week I wanted to talk about Chris Rock, Tamborine, which is his new comedy special. And what I didn't realize was this was actually his first stand-up special in 10 years, which was crazy to me. I didn't realize he had taken such a hiatus, I guess, because I don't really pay attention to Chris Rock that much. But I've never really been too familiar with his comedy, only a few of his movies, and I definitely wouldn't say that I'm a fan, but I was intrigued to watch this because I hadn't heard much out of the guy, and he's a pretty respected stand-up comedian. I think that he sets the bar for a lot of comics. And with all that being said, I didn't laugh once during this comedy special. So, in fact, I think that Chris Rock laughed at his own jokes more than I laughed during the hour and a half or however long it was. So, this dude definitely buys into his own humor. It's not that the entire special was bad. It was just really hit or miss. Some parts of it I enjoyed, like him discussing his recent divorce. In fact, in one point in the special, he mentions that this was a way for him to earn back all of the money that he lost in his divorce, which I believe after seeing the comedy special, it definitely felt like a cash grab, but maybe I'm being too hard on it. The aspect of it that I definitely have to tiptoe around discussing not liking is the race aspect of his jokes. A large portion of his set concentrated on the divide between white people and black people, which is a very real issue. And I think that when jokes are made about truly real issues, that it relieves some of the tension and people enjoy laughing about it. The problem with Chris Rock's set is that not only were his jokes not funny, but they seemed incredibly hateful. And maybe it's just because I had just watched the new Dave Chappelle specials that released a few weeks ago, a couple days earlier, which covered similar topics in a funny way that didn't seem forced like Chris Rock did it. But either way, I don't want to get too involved here because I'm kind of out of my league and out of my element talking about that. But that is one of the aspects of the special that I didn't really like. I just, overall, I don't think that Chris Rock's delivery was really great in the special either. It seemed kind of word vomity. It didn't really seem very structured to me. So who knows? Maybe it was just a little rust from not having done a special in so long, but either way, it just wasn't for me. If you have to choose, I would definitely pick the Dave Chappelle specials that just came out instead of this one, because they're much funnier.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought this up because I tried to watch this a few weeks ago, or maybe it was just last weekend. I don't remember. And I got about 15, 20 minutes into it and I was like, nah, I'm done. Like I couldn't even finish it because I had pretty much the same reaction that you did. Was I was just not that impressed by it. And I just feel like it came off as angry, like you said, but as far as like the structure of the show, it felt like it was a show from a comic that does stand-up specials like every year. Like he churns them out like every year, and he was kind of getting low on material, and this was just kind of his token special for this year.
Yeah.
Which is even more depressing because that's not the case at all. He hasn't done one in, like you said, like 10 years. So he should have had plenty of material to go off of and really just absolutely kill it. And that's what I expected. And it just wasn't that at all. It just felt really kind of weak material and super, super wordy. Like it just felt like it moved way too slow. And maybe that was always his style. And maybe I just didn't notice it when I was a kid watching some of his stand-up specials. Like maybe I just didn't understand that was kind of his thing at the time, because I don't want to say that I study stand-up, but I wasn't to that period yet where I had watched so much that it kind of was more noticeable for me. But just sitting there watching his stand-up special, I was like, if I were to do a show like that, if I were to go and do 15 minutes now, most of his stand-up is about a big African American, so that would be super awkward if I did that material. But if I did a similar type of joke in a similar type of style, I would never be asked to do another show again, because there was like 3 or 4 minutes of filler and then there'd be like one punchline. And that's fine when you have an hour special and you're a guy like Chris Rock who has this reputation. People are going to kind of go along with you for a lot longer. And I've talked about this before, but it's something that I definitely can't do as an up and coming stand up, because I have to be rapid fire. And that's just kind of my style anyways. But it just felt like it worked really, really slow. And by the time you got to the punchline, it just did not work for me at all.
No, and that's a really good point. And I think since you've brought that up, I've noticed it more and more in the stand-up specials I watch, is that there are a lot of comedians that have been around a while and are established that get away with quite a bit in their act that wouldn't work if they were no name, which is crazy that we kind of set the bar lower for them because they've already established that they're good comedians. So, I don't know. I definitely got that vibe with this Chris Rock special. And it's funny, I just watched the newest episode of Crashing this morning, which is a show I talked about a couple weeks ago. And I talked about him kind of being the bar for a lot of people. And that show even this week referenced, how amazing he is. And maybe I need to go back and revisit some of his older stuff, but I don't see it, man. Like, I didn't like his comedy special. His movies are mostly terrible. So I don't know. I just think he might be a little overrated.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, us being two white guys, I'm literally the whitest guy you'll ever meet. So it's hard for us to relate to some of the material, but as a fan of stand-up, I liked him as a kid, and he's always done that type of stand-up. So it's not like I could relate to him earlier in my life, and I can't relate to him now. Like, it just didn't land for me at all, because I just didn't think the jokes were that funny. Because I can appreciate a joke, whether I can relate to it or not.
And well, that's what I'm kind of saying about Dave Chappelle is it's the same brand of humor.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dave Chappelle talks a lot about race, and I'm a white guy, very white guy, like you said. So, but I can appreciate what he's saying, and I can appreciate his humor, and it just wasn't there for me with him. So, yeah, it's a bummer, but we'll move on. So, what are you into, man?
I am into a Netflix original as well. It's a movie called Mute, which is written and directed by a guy named Duncan Jones, who has done a couple of different sci-fi movies. He did Moon, which is a movie that I blind bought like 6 years ago and is still sitting on my shelf, and I have not watched it.
Dude, watch Moon. Moon's amazing.
I've heard so many good things about it, and I just for whatever reason never watched it. I don't know why. Maybe
it even
I'll
has
watch it
Sam
today.
Rockwell in it, who you love.
Yeah, I know. I have like a nerd boner for Sam Rockwell, and I've literally never watched it. That's actually the reason I bought that movie. I was there's a Sam Rockwell movie that I've never seen before. Let me buy it. It was when I was in college and I had a little bit more disposable income.
Yeah.
I don't blind buy that much anymore. He also directed Source Code as well. I don't know if he wrote Source Code or not, which is another movie that I blind bought and I actually watched and I really liked. And then, of course, he is more famous for directing Warcraft, which was a shit show. As far as I hear, I'm not a fan of Warcraft, the game, so I can't really tell you if it was any good or not as far as the game's concerned. But I've heard some really bad things about that movie, and he's kind of come out and talked about how it was I think he described it in a recent interview that I read the other day, like a very political movie, as far as like there was a lot of different politics that went into making that movie, and he was
I bet.
kind of ashamed of the product that he put out there. But anyways, Mute is about a Amish guy who gets in an accident as a child and leaves him without the ability to talk, which is very strange because it's set in this like futuristic sci-fi universe, which apparently it's set in the same universe as Moon. But I haven't seen Moon, so I don't really know. There's like a couple of Moon Easter eggs in this movie. Like Sam Rockwell does play a little bit, like a tiny, tiny part in this movie. It's kind of weird that he's mute because in this sci-fi universe that they've built, like tech is very, very important, and apparently a lot of things are voice activated, so that obviously is a problem for this guy. And he's Amish, so he doesn't really use tech very often, and he also doesn't get surgery to fix the fact that he's mute. Apparently they can fix him really easily. He just refuses to do it because he's Amish. And I kind of feel like that's the perfect thing to bring up when I first talk about this movie, because I feel like a lot of things about this movie were just in there to make this movie seem more interesting than it really was. Like the fact that he's Amish means that he doesn't use his tech and he stays mute. Well, the only reason that that's important is because it makes it harder for him to try to find some information that he was trying to find because he's not used to using tech. And he has a hard time dealing with the tech because he doesn't know how to use it. But he also, like I said, a lot of the tech is voice activated and he can't use it. So that it just is an excuse for him to struggle in this movie, and it feels artificial. And honestly, the sci-fi aspect of it, it's kind of weird to even say that this movie is a sci-fi movie because it doesn't really play that much of a part, which I think is good in a way. Like it doesn't get overwhelming how like futuristic this movie is. It's kind of feels like a ground level sci-fi movie because you kind of see them and they drive cars and stuff like that, but there's also flying cars as well. So it kind of mixes those two things really well. But there's just so much in this movie that just doesn't make sense to me. Like it doesn't really get explained at all. Like, for example, Paul Rudd's character, Cactus Bill. First of all, if they explain why his nickname is Cactus Bill, I missed it because I don't think they do at all. That's a weird thing, to throw in there. He is a, United States soldier who has gone AWOL, and apparently in this universe, and I don't know if this is like an Easter egg from Moon or not, but in this universe, that's like a huge problem. Like, they're in Germany. The movie's based in Germany. And apparently there's military police all over the place looking for these soldiers that are AWOL. And Paul Rudd is basically, his motivation is he's trying to get out of Germany. He's kind of like stuck because he needs these IDs for him and his little daughter. They never explain why that's a problem. And again, I don't know if that's something that goes back to Moon or not,
it does not.
But yeah, I don't know why that's happening. That's just an excuse again to get Paul Rudd out of Germany. And a lot of things in this movie were just not explained at all. And it was kind of disappointing because I feel like there was some elements in there that I appreciated. But again, the whole character being mute and being Amish, again, just felt like excuses to make his journey more difficult. And this movie just left me with too many questions. And I didn't really dig it that much. I felt like there was elements in there that if they were developed could have been cooler, but yeah, this movie isn't for me.
Yeah, that's disappointing because if you just sold that movie to me plot synopsis wise, I'd be pretty intrigued by the cast and of course Duncan Jones being attached to it as a director and a writer. Like, that sounds pretty awesome. So it's disappointing that it's not very good. To be honest, like, I love what Netflix is doing by putting out their own films, but they don't have an amazing track record. The one upside there, I guess, I cut this from Nerd News, but it was announced last week that the Duplass brothers had signed like a 4-picture deal with Netflix, and they pretty consistently make pretty good stuff. So hopefully that will bring some quality to some of these Netflix movies. But, we were both kind of lukewarm on Bright. Cloverfield Paradox was pretty bad. Sounds like this is pretty bad. They've had some movies that are good. Like, I heard Oakjaw was good. I haven't watched it yet, but it sounds like they've been pretty hit or miss. Yeah,
and that's kind of disappointing because it seems like we kind of give them the benefit of the doubt because they've done some really good work with the Defender series for the most part, other than Iron Fist, of course. And there's some other really good stuff on Netflix as far as their original series. So I assumed that their foray into making movies would have gone a little bit more smoothly than this.
Yeah. No, you're definitely right. That's a good point, is they've kind of got the TV game down, but they're struggling movie-wise. I didn't think about that. So I wonder what the disconnect is there.
I don't know. And they're getting people that, at least for me anyways, are talented. Like Max Landis wrote Bright. It just didn't hit for me. And then of course Duncan Jones did this movie. So I feel like they're following the right formula. We've talked about this before, especially with Star Wars, where you find these really good up and coming directors, and maybe Duncan Jones would maybe argue that he's already there, but I don't think he's necessarily a name that a lot of people know. But I feel like they're doing the right thing by getting these guys and getting these talented up and coming kind of writers and directors. It's just not working out for them.
He should go by Duncan Bowie. Then he would maybe be better known.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Isn't he? I forgot about that.
Yeah. He's David Bowie's kid. So,
I forgot about
that name, man. But no, there are some Netflix movies in development right now that I'm excited about. I talked about The Dirt a few weeks ago. That was kind of a story just for me, but Martin Scorsese is also shooting a movie right now for Netflix called I think it's The Irishman, and it has, Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Joe Pesci in it. So, hopefully there's some stuff on the horizon that'll be pretty good between that and, like I said, the Duplass brothers coming in. But, we'll see if they can kind of course correct a little bit.
For sure.
Cool. You ready for comics?
Yeah. What'd you read this week?
So a few weeks ago, I talked about Old Man Hawkeye and kind of decided right there on the podcast that I was going to go back and read Old Man Logan. And I did. I read it last Sunday. So I know that Pat's talked about this comic before, and I don't know that I have too incredibly much to add, but I did want to bring it up because I liked it quite a bit. So, as you all probably know, I'm on record as not being a huge Wolverine fan, but I do like Elseworld tales, and something about this continuity where the villains won really strikes a chord with me. So like I said, I sat down and read this last Sunday, and I read it in one sitting, which isn't a huge feat, but I'll definitely say that it sucked me in and didn't ease up as I got through it. So I won't get too terribly detailed with the plot because it's an older book, and like I said, Pat's talked about it before, but in case you've been living under a rock, it's about an alternate universe where the Red Skull united all the supervillains, and since they greatly outnumbered the superheroes, were able to finally win. The U.S. then gets split into provinces that were run by different villains, and 50 years later, we catch up with Logan, who has retired from being a superhero and is living life on a farm with a family. But when he needs money, he decides to help Hawkeye transport a mysterious case across the U.S. so that he can pay rent. And, along the way, we kind of find out more of the history of this universe and what led to Logan retiring. And I hate to say this, but I'm really, really bummed that Mark Miller or Millar, I know that the jury's still out on how we pronounce his last name. I need to look that up because I've been bringing him up so much lately. But I'm bummed that he doesn't write Marvel stories anymore. He wrote some amazing stuff with this character. He wrote Civil War, and while I also love the things that he's done for Image, like Kick-Ass and Kingsman and Reborn, all of those things, I'd really like to see him tackle some of these characters again. With all of that being said, I think that this is definitely the best Wolverine story I've ever read. But I would say also that it doesn't change my feelings on the character that much. I don't think that Wolverine was necessarily the reason that I loved this book so much, but more so the issues and the climate that surrounded the character. And I would really love to see something in this continuity developed with Mark Millar at the helm that kind of takes place after this book, just to see where the character goes. I know that Marvel has an ongoing series right now for Old Man Logan, and I don't know how that plays against the story that we see in this book, but I would love to see Mark Millar revisit it, because I think that there's some more stories you can tell there for sure in this world. So, yeah, man, thanks for recommending that to me, because I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah, like I said, I liked it when I read it before we reviewed Logan. I think it was that episode that I actually talked about it, and I liked it quite a lot. I don't have a ton to follow up with it because I haven't read it since. But yeah, it's a really good book. If you haven't read it yet, definitely check it out.
Yeah, I would love to see it translated to film too. I mean, obviously Logan was based on it somewhat, but they don't have half the characters that appear or are referenced in the book. So it'd be pretty cool to see something like that down the road. I think it'd be a ways off since Logan just came out last year, but yeah, that'd be a fun story to see.
Yeah, honestly, it's just kind of in tone and in kind of some of the themes is based on Old Man Logan, but it's really not.
Yeah, it isn't. It's very loosely based, for sure. But yeah, good stuff, man. So what'd you read this week?
I read a new miniseries from Vertigo, which of course is a DC imprint, called Deathbed, which what brought me to this book was, because I don't read a ton of DC and I definitely don't read a ton of Vertigo, what brought me to this book was the writer, Joshua Williamson, who writes for DC. He writes the Flash comic book, which I've talked about a lot on this podcast that I really, really like. It's kind of brought me into that character. I was never really a fan of Flash. I never really gave him a shot because I just thought he was like a one-note character, but they've really done a great job with him in this most recent run, and I've really, really enjoyed it so far. So I wanted to check out some of his other work, and this is a miniseries, and it just came out this past week, so I thought it was a perfect opportunity. And honestly, after reading it, I don't have a ton to say, because it's a #1 for a miniseries, so they don't give you a ton. But this book seems like, at least this story, seems like kind of the perfect story to tell in comic books, because it's really pretty fucking weird, but weird in a really good way. It's just really, really unique. Basically, what happens is there's this aspiring novelist who, in order to pay her bills, kind of ghost writes for these rich people that want to have autobiographies. So she ghost writes for them, and she takes this gig for this millionaire that she's never heard of. And she goes to his house, and apparently he's like, basically, it reminded me of those beer commercials, the most interesting man in the world, because it seems like that's kind of how they talk about him. Is like he's gone on all these different adventures, and he's had all these crazy stories and stuff that he wants to tell. And basically, the end of the book is him essentially telling her that he's used her as bait and to bring out some of his enemies, and his enemies happen to be like these undead mummy creatures, and he murders them. And it's pretty awesome. I mean, it gets pretty batshit crazy, as you can imagine by me describing right there, but it's pretty interesting, and I'm definitely intrigued by it. I think it does a good job of giving you enough that I've talked about this a ton in past episodes, but like number ones kind of have to give you enough, but don't want to blow its load. And I think it definitely does a good job of that. It doesn't spend too much time on exposition. I think this is only 6 or maybe 8 issue arc. So they definitely have to get to the shit quick, and they don't spend a ton of time in this issue with exposition. The artwork is amazing. It definitely, it grabs you immediately because, again, not a ton happens in this book until the last couple of pages. So the artwork has to be amazing because that kind of has to carry your attention throughout the first, I guess, like 18 pages or so. So I definitely think that they're off to a really good start. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what the rest of this mini-series has to offer.
Yeah, man, I might have to check this out. Did you say it came out last week?
I believe it came out on Wednesday, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I might have to check this out. It sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, dude, you ready for some nerd news?
Yeah, what do you got this week? So,
I had a couple dumb stories in here that I cut out, like the, not that the Duplass brothers are dumb, but, you know, there's not really a lot of meat to chew there. So, there were a couple things that actually got announced last week that carried a little bit of weight. The first being that Jessica Chastain is officially in talks to join the It sequel as the adult Bev, right? That's the character's name?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think from the moment that movie came out last September, people were speculating about who these kids could be cast as adults, and Jessica Chastain's name shot up pretty quick because she has a history with the director of this movie. She was in Mother, which was directed by... I'm sorry, not Mother. Fuck that movie.
Oh, no, she was not in that movie.
No, oh my God, Mama. My bad. So he directed Mama, and she was the main character in that movie. So makes sense for sure. I think that somebody had even asked her in an interview if she'd be willing to, and she said she'd love to. So of course, got to get down to the nuts and bolts and get her paid and all that good stuff. But I think that she would crush it. She's a great actress.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping for Amy Adams myself, but I mean, I'm a sucker for redheads. So as long as she keeps her red hair, I'm good.
I mean, I would imagine that's half the reason that she's like...
Yeah, oh, for sure. It was funny because right after that movie like exploded for good reason because it's amazing, but everybody was kind of putting out there, oh, who would I would like to see cast? And it was just, for Bev, it was just people were picking famous redhead actresses. And I feel like that was the easiest way to go. And of course, I did my own little thing on our Instagram page. You can check that out for who I wanted to be cast as the adults. But Amy Adams was my pick for Bev, but I don't think she's a bad second choice, and I get why they would pick her considering her history with that particular director.
Yeah, man. So hopefully we'll start getting some casting news, because I think they start filming later this year for a 2019 release, if I'm not mistaken. So they're probably putting stuff.
I thought it already started production, but
yeah,
I mean, that means like pre-production, like, cause they have to do a lot of the costumes and stuff like that. They do that way before they bring in the actors.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll go with no names or if they'll go with mostly people we've heard of. So it'd be interesting to see for sure. Let's see. So talk about jumping the shark. Jurassic World 3 has a release date of June 11th, 2021. So obviously we have not seen much out of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom yet, but they're feeling good about it, I guess, because the third movie has been announced. So I believe Colin Trevorrow is coming back to co-write it, but again, he won't be directing it. just like he didn't direct the sequel that comes out this summer. But I don't know, man. We had some things to say about that movie during our Rotten Tomatoes draft, and I know that since then a Super Bowl trailer was released, but I'm still not completely sold on it.
Yeah, I'm definitely not completely sold on it. I will say that the Super Bowl TV spot thing, whatever they want to call it, looked a little bit better than the original trailer that we saw that we kind of bitched about on the Rotten Tomatoes film draft. I think this movie would have been taken a little bit higher if I had seen the Super Bowl ad first, because I think that they did that scene with a kid in the bed is pretty cool looking. Like, I think that kind of revved my engine a little bit. I don't know if that's the right metaphor or not.
I don't know why, but I'm not comfortable with you saying that.
As soon as I said it, I was like, that seems sexual. Like, I want to fuck this movie. But yeah, I think it would have gone a little bit higher. At least for me, I would have considered it a little bit higher if we had seen that TV spot before. So I'm a little bit more optimistic about this movie, but not much.
Yeah, so we'll see for sure. I mean, I love Chris Pratt. We both do. So if anybody can save it, he can, but there's only so much you can do with a shitty script about dinosaurs. I think the reason that I liked Jurassic World was it was a nostalgia thing. Like, we hadn't seen this park in close to 20 years. So it was cool to revisit that. And now, since we've gotten the nostalgia piece out of the way, like, you actually have to tell a really good story. And I don't know that there's a really good story left for that franchise. So we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. It just seemed, especially by that first trailer, it seemed like they were kind of revisiting some of the mistakes that they had with the original Jurassic Park, sequels.
Well, I know at one time there was like a script or an idea floating around for a Jurassic Park sequel, like way before Jurassic World was announced, and like the idea would be weaponizing dinosaurs, which is kind of explored a little bit in Jurassic World with Vincent D'Onofrio's character. But they were talking about like dinosaurs with guns, like dinosaurs.
Yeah, that's what I thought of. Like, not like the Dinobots or anything like that, but kind of like putting like guns on their heads and stuff. Like, that's what the image I got when you first said that.
No, like dinosaur human hybrids with guns is, I want to say, like one of the ideas that was floating around. So if we get to that point in this franchise, like, I'm done. Like, that's some Transformers.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So we'll see. But we'll move on to the next story, which concerns Joss Whedon. I think I called him Josh. I didn't mean to. It's Joss Whedon. He has stepped away from the Batgirl movie because he did not have a story for it. So he said that he was excited to get that offer from Warner Brothers, but the more he thought about it, the more he didn't really have a story to tell. And it seems like everybody's been pretty split on this, like either sad or happy. I think that the consensus has been like, all right, that's good. Joss Whedon, according to his ex-wife, is kind of a piece of shit. So maybe we get a female writer director attached to this. And it was kind of cool. I saw some stuff on Twitter where a female writer had tweeted Warner Brothers that she had some ideas for it, and somebody from Warner Brothers like tweeted back, email me and we can talk. Like, I don't know if any of that will come to fruition, but I think that with what we've seen from these female-led movies, or from like Black Panther being an African-American-led movie, that it's probably best to get somebody in that demographic to tell that story.
Oh yeah, for sure. And honestly, I was a little bit bummed, but it kind of made sense to me, because obviously, as we've talked about a lot, like, I think Warner Brothers and DC, I mean, it's laughable at this point. The fact that they would just, he's a big name, so let's go ahead and give him a movie, and not really even have an idea or a plan, how to do it or what they're gonna do. I just think that's hilarious. Like, they can't get anything right at this point.
I think that you're just a sucker for bald guys with red beards.
I don't think so. I don't think my red hair fetish goes quite that far.
No, so we'll see what happens with all of that shit. So, we mentioned that we were recording this on a Monday morning, and so one final piece of nerd news is I woke up to some news that I wasn't thrilled to see, but I guess it could have been a lot worse, and that was that Kevin Smith was doing a stand-up special last night, and he had 2 shows, and after the first show, he threw up and was going to try to push through the second show, but he ended up going to the hospital and he had a heart attack. So like a pretty severe heart attack from what it sounds like. So he is alive and well, or I don't know about well, he's alive, and he had posted some stuff to social media about it that was honestly kind of moving. I don't know if you took time to read it, but definitely not the stuff that I want to see on a Monday morning for sure.
Yeah, it was definitely scary. It's one of those things where, and we've had this discussion before, it's like there's certain people that you just can't imagine, as much as it seems silly being somebody that we've both actually seen him, and I don't necessarily say that we've met him, but we've gone to a couple of his shows, and he's a very personable guy, so I kind of feel like we have met him. But like there's certain people that even though you haven't met them, you can't imagine your life without them, and he's definitely one of those people. So it was a very scary thing for me to see that. And then I saw the tweet first, and the tweet obviously being a lot shorter and just kind of explaining the situation. And then I went on his Facebook and I did read the stuff, and just, there hasn't been a situation where I haven't agreed with him. Like, he's just one of those guys, like, you can dislike his movies if you want. That, I mean, that's your opinion. But I like him not just for his movies, but just his personality in general. Yeah. And I think, given his situation, that Facebook post is kind of like sums up the reason why I love him so much, is because he can find the perfect perspective, at least for me, in any situation. He basically just talked about, and I would definitely suggest reading it for yourself, but he just kind of explains how he's had a really good life, and then if this is how he goes, then that's fine. And it was very, very touching, and it just kind of made me love him even more. I didn't know that was physically possible.
Yeah. I mean, there's a reason that, and this is going to sound silly in the grand scheme of things, but there's a reason that I have a Kevin Smith Funko Pop staring at me right now as I record this podcast. And that's because, obviously he's been a huge influence to both of us. And, I remember getting into an argument with my wife a few years ago. I think it was before we were even married, when Robin Williams died, and just her saying she doesn't get it when people get sad about celebrities, passing away. And luckily Kevin Smith didn't pass away, but I think that this is like the perfect example of why it matters. Like, he's influenced us. He's somebody that I listen to like every week on his numerous podcasts. It's somebody that, it's weird, but you think of the guy as a friend because you hear him talk about stuff so much, and you hear him, like you say, be honest about things, all the time, that so much about him that it'd leave a really huge void in my life if he weren't around anymore, creatively with his movies, with his podcasts, with his imprint on television. It's just a guy that has really influenced us both quite a bit with his work, and I'm glad he's okay. I hope he continues to be okay. But that Facebook post, and I think that he posted it on Instagram as well. Like, it was very, very well written, and he's talked about death occasionally on some of his podcasts, and he mentions it in the Facebook post. Like, death is something that scares him, but he faced his fears, and it wasn't as bad as I guess he thought it was going to be. Like, he's lived a great life. So definitely put it in perspective, like you said. And obviously we wish him the best. I hope that this might be a little selfish, but I have tickets to see Hollywood Babylon in Cleveland on April 9th. So I hope that he can get mended and still make that trip out, because I'm really looking forward to seeing him for, I think, the 3rd time it would be.
Yeah, I actually, and it's funny that you brought that up, because I thought about that same type of thing, and I don't know, it shouldn't have crossed my mind, I know, and it's selfish, but it was just something, like, I immediately, of course, it wasn't the first thing I thought of, I have to put that out there, but he was, hosting I guess like a pre-show party on IMDb, because he does a lot of work for IMDb for the Oscars. And I was like, oh man, I was really excited for that, because I love the Oscars and I love him. So I was kind of hoping that he would get better to still do that, but I doubt he will.
Yeah, it sounds like he's kind of got to take a little time off and course correct a few things. So obviously we wish him the best. So,
Of course.
that is all I have for nerd news.
All right, so we are going to, as we do for many episodes, we are going to be reviewing a new movie, and that movie is Annihilation. It was directed by Alex Garland. Apparently, it's based on a series of books, or maybe it's just one book. I don't remember. I've heard a couple of different things, so maybe it's a little bit of both. Alex Garland is the writer of movies like Sunshine and 28 Days Later. He also wrote and directed Ex Machina. Annihilation stars Natalie Portman as an ex-soldier turned biologist who must explore a mysterious area called the Shimmer to save her long-lost husband, who is played by Oscar Isaac. Alex Garland is a director and writer that I respect his work, but I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm a huge fan of him. I did really, really like 28 Days Later. However, I know this is going to break Matt from the Obsessive Viewer's heart because he's a huge Sunshine fan. But I watched Sunshine for the first time right after Ex Machina came out. Like, I watched Ex Machina and I was like, okay, well, I kind of want to see some of his other work. And I watched Sunshine and I remember kind of liking it at the time, but now I could literally tell you nothing about the movie. So that's obviously, tells you a lot about how, that movie stuck with me. So I'm just not a huge fan of him, but I can respect his work.
So I remember seeing the trailer for this movie and laughing at it because it was so far out there for me. Like, the Shimmer? Are you serious? Like, it just looked like a pile of garbage, if I'm being honest, from the trailers. But as we got closer to this week and trying to decide on what we wanted to do for our main topic, the idea of reviewing this movie came up. And when I saw that Garland was the writer-director here, I got really excited because, unlike you, I would say that I'm a fan. I do like Sunshine. I think it's a little overrated, but 28 Days Later is great. He wrote the screenplay for Judge Dredd. I'm sorry, it's just called Dredd, which is amazing. I love Ex Machina. It was on my top 10 the year it came out, 2014. So I would say that I'm a fan of his. So when I saw that this was a project that he was very close to creatively, I don't know why I pronounced it that way, but
I was going to let it go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't know why that came out, but either way, I really respect his work, so I got excited for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't. I appreciate Ex Machina. I think it was one of those things where I had my expectations way, way too high because I'm a huge fan of the genre and I do like his work. So I think I just got my expectations up way, way too high. And then when I watched it, it's definitely a slow burn. And I think a lot of his work is kind of like that, which I can respect. I can respect him trying to do something a little bit different. It just doesn't coincide with my taste as well as I would like it to.
Yeah, and I think that's fair.
All right, so jumping right in, this is your first episode. We start off each of these reviews by kind of just giving a general overview of what we felt about whatever we're reviewing, and we call it broad strokes. So how'd you feel about Annihilation?
So overall, it was an okay movie. I appreciate what it did from a story standpoint and thought a lot of the notes hit. However, some of the movie didn't hit. And at the end of the day, you know, I found it hard to kind of compile my thoughts for this movie because I was so indifferent to it. And maybe that's not fair, but this film definitely didn't leave a lasting impression on me. It's funny. It's very similar to what you had to say about Sunshine. It's like, I appreciate the undertones that the movie dealt with, but at the end of the day, it's not a movie that I'm going to think about a year from now. It just kind of came and it went. And I doubt that I'll ever talk about it ever again. So it was a fine movie. It just, I don't know. It seemed pretty mediocre at the end of the day.
So we've had this conversation before and we kind of had a pretty intense conversation when we talked about Mother and we reviewed that movie. And then of course we had a similar conversation when you brought up The Post and Darkest Hour, how sometimes the reputation of the actors in a movie or the reputation of the filmmaker leads people to, especially on Rotten Tomatoes, give it a higher score or give it the benefit of the doubt. And for me, I don't feel as strongly as I did or you did after we saw Mother, because that movie is just an absolute fucking pretentious shit show. But I kind of felt very similar walking out of the theater after seeing this movie, because I think that if it was anybody else, because he obviously has a reputation of doing really, really good sci-fi movies, I think that if it was anybody else that did this movie, people would be trashing it. Obviously, I don't feel as strongly about this movie as I did about Mother. And I think I looked at Mother right before we started recording, and it's at like 69%. And that's way too fucking high. That's because everybody loves his work, and his reputation precedes him for sure. This film, I looked it up, is 86%. That is absolutely way too high for this movie. This movie had some serious problems that we're going to get to here in a second, but I felt like his reputation as a filmmaker is what gave him that score, and why everybody's kind of giving this film the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring up Mother, because I have some notes in my story portion around the similarities between this and Mother. So, as always, it sounds like, unfortunately, we're on the same page a little bit too much.
Yeah.
That's why we're friends.
Yeah. So story-wise, why don't we just jump right into it?
Yeah, so I mentioned in our intro there that I was pretty excited for the story in this movie because of Ex Machina. That movie, it sounds like we have different opinions on it, but I feel like it balances sci-fi, horror, and thriller really well. So even though the trailer for Annihilation didn't capture my imagination, I grew pretty excited to see it. And what I appreciate about Ex Machina is that it carries over to the story, I guess, or I guess I would say what I appreciate about Annihilation, rather, is that there's a lot of crazy shit that goes on in this movie, but at the end of the day, it's about some aspect of humanity at its core. And this is where I kind of have some stuff to say about Mother. So I had some really terrible things to say about that movie, Mother, again, that I still completely agree with. But where that movie failed, this movie, I would say, did a better job. It may seem like a weird comparison, but both movies are about something other than what you're seeing on the screen. So where Mother was a piece of trash, I thought this movie did it fairly well and showed like the self-destructive side of humanity. I thought that they showed that really well through the story. However, I do have to kind of stand by what I've said in the past. And what I've said in the past is, with movies like this, if I have to Google an explanation of the end of a movie, then I'm not going to be bought into it, because it's how can you appreciate what the characters are going through if you have a hard time comprehending something in the theater? Like, how am I supposed to be bought into the plot? How am I supposed to be bought into the character choices? And the big selling point for me is how I can relate to a movie. Like, that's what I go into a movie thinking is, if I relate to the characters or the story really well, typically I'm going to give it a really good review. And this movie didn't make me care about the characters or the story. So while I appreciate that they showed this side of humanity through the story, at the end of the day, like, when I got out, I had to Google what the fuck the ending was about. And I've tried to avoid saying stuff like that in the past, because I don't want to come across as dumb for not understanding something, if I'm being honest. But whenever I Googled some stuff about this movie, I saw a ton of articles that promised to explain the ending, which let me know that I wasn't alone in being a little confused after the movie was over. And it goes back to what we said about the post, like you said. So, I spent a long time on this podcast, or just in life in general, saying that I liked a movie because I thought I was supposed to like it. And, I would typically not own up to having to Google to have something explained to me, but I had to do it with this movie. And at the end of the day, I think that the fact that I had to do that shows that the story wasn't really that great. So while I definitely enjoyed the sci-fi wrapping that this movie came in, the climax ruined a little bit of it for me and left me feeling indifferent to the whole experience.
Yeah, I was actually kind of afraid when cause you were a lot stronger about Mother than I was. I hated that movie for sure, but you absolutely trashed it when we reviewed it. Now, of course, in its defense, not that I'm trying to defend Mother, we did review that movie right after we saw it. So we had it, we were brewing, with quite a lot of hatred for that movie. Like, we didn't let it settle at all. But I was afraid when I brought Mother up because you were so angry about it, you would be like, no, that movie is awful and this movie is a lot better. And it is, like, don't get me wrong, like, as far as like the batshit crazy meter, Mother is like a 15 and this is like a 6 or a 7. Like, it's definitely a lot calmer, but the last like 20-25 minutes of this movie is just absolutely crazy. I will say, as far as the story aspect of it, I'll just kind of start at the beginning for me. And I don't know if this is something that I've brought up in the podcast before, but it definitely hinders this movie, at least how I felt about this movie. I hate flash forwards. I think they're so stupid. And especially in this movie, because at the very beginning of the movie, you see Natalie Portman, and she's talking to these scientists, and they basically let you know that this scene happens after she gets out of the shimmer, and they tell you who dies and who doesn't. And so, I mean, there's no suspense. First of all, in that scene, you know that Natalie Portman is gonna be okay. At least you think she's gonna be okay. Yeah. There's a bit of a twist at the end. But anyways, well, not necessarily even a twist. It's more like they leave it open-ended. But they also tell you who lives in the shimmer. Like, there's no suspense. It kind of almost handcuffs itself at the very within the first 5 minutes of this movie. It takes a lot of the suspense out of the movie, which is a shame because I think that there was some good ingredients here, most notably some of the performances. I think everybody was on point in this movie, but we'll get into that here in a little bit. And honestly, I never thought that I would ever get to the point where I would complain about too much character development, but I really think that this movie is kind of hindered by trying to get too much development, because I think it moves way, way too slow, especially in the first act. To get them into the shimmer takes way, way too long. And that works if you are planning on it being like a batshit crazy, or not necessarily batshit crazy, but like balls to the wall once you get to the shimmer. But that doesn't really happen in this movie, maybe until like the last 25 minutes, and it's almost a 2-hour movie. So there's too much character development, and I don't know necessarily if there's too much character development or if it just has a really bad pacing problem, because this movie is really, really slow and it takes a really long time to get going. And I know that people are going to complain about the ending, and most notably for me, how it was kind of open-ended and they don't explain it to you. Like you said, you had to Google it to kind of understand better about what happened. And honestly, I felt that way throughout the whole movie. Like, I felt like I didn't really understand what was happening because they didn't really explain a ton. And I don't know if it's just because they wanted you to get what you got out of it, which it can be good in certain spots. But when the whole movie's like that, it just feels like they didn't know what they wanted to do with it. It felt like they were just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and hoped that something stuck. Like that was my impression in this movie, was that they didn't really know exactly where they wanted to go with it. So they just left everything super mysterious.
Yeah. And you and I have said it before in reviews that we've done, but if you're going to tell a story, tell us the story. Don't leave it all up for interpretation. And this movie doesn't do a terrible job of that. Like, it is like a story that actually makes sense, as opposed to something like Mother that doesn't make any sense at all and is a pretentious load of shit. Which, by the way, I do stand by that review, even though we reviewed it right after we saw it, for what it's worth. But, yeah, I mean, if
I would have no idea, because I'm never going to see that movie again.
I'm just saying, like, with the story in this movie, like, tell us what you want to tell us, man. Like, don't leave it up for interpretation.
Yeah, and I don't want to come off like I'm just like hold my hand throughout the whole movie. Like, I can get a little bit where you're trying to infer some stuff every once in a while. But like I said, I just feel like there was so much in this movie that they just didn't fucking bother to explain at all. Like, there's so much. I don't want to sit here and list everything, but like the tattoos, that was weird. Like they kept showing you the tattoo and then they never said anything about it. And then of course you have the like when they, the thing of infects you, like your insides move. They never really explained that. They never really explained the fungus that much. Like there was some cool things in this movie visually, but it just didn't really tie into the story that much. It felt like they would just tried a bunch of different stuff.
No, I completely agree.
All right, so let's go right into performances. How'd you feel about the cast of this movie?
I didn't really have any complaints, to be honest. Like, I thought that everybody did a pretty solid job. It was nice to see Tessa Thompson in something so close to Thor Ragnarok, where she was great. So I thought that she did really well. I'll be honest, I'm kind of hot or cold on Natalie Portman, depending on the role. Like, sometimes she does a great job. Sometimes it kind of seems like she phones it in. And I'll be honest, in this movie, it seems like it's somewhere in the middle. Like, I think she's a fine actress, but she didn't really blow me away. Same could be said with Oscar Isaac. In the promotion for this movie, a big deal was made that he was filming this at the same time as Star Wars. And I feel like, honestly, like he gave a better performance in The Last Jedi, which,
honestly, though, he's barely in this movie, though.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess half the time he's in it, he's supposed to be emotionless. But at that point, why even bother? I don't know. He wasn't great in it. But besides that, like, I don't really have it. Nobody was bad per se.
I think I liked the performances a lot more than you did. I think that Natalie Portman's performance was actually one of the better ones I've seen, maybe since Black Swan, but she hasn't honestly been in a ton since then. But I think that her character plays everything so close to the vest that it's a very subtle performance, but I really appreciated it. I think everybody did a really, really good job in this movie. Like I said, Oscar Isaac's not really in this movie that much, so it's kind of hard to tell, like, oh, is his performance all that great? And like you said, most of the time you do see him, he's supposed to be kind of this emotionless, like, shell of a character. So it definitely worked, for me at least. And I can't remember her name. Is it Gina Rodriguez? Is that her name?
Yeah, that sounds right.
She was awesome. I thought she was really, really good. And the way that her character progressed in the movie, I thought was really well done. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was a subtle performance, but in a way it kind of was, because I think lesser actors or actresses would have gone really, really over the top with that performance, especially towards the end. And I think that there was a little bit of that, but not too much.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think we're too far off base there. It just sounds like you liked it a little bit more than I did performance-wise. So, I didn't think anybody was bad, but it was what it was.
Yeah, there's almost every time that we review something, there's always that one person that I'm just like, I can't wait to get to performances because I'm going to trash this one person because they did awful. And I never really saw that person. There's actually, honestly, not that many people in this movie, because most of the time it's these four scientists that you see in the Shimmer, so you don't really see a ton of other actors in this movie. So I think everybody did a really, really good job.
Cool. So what's our last category? What do you think? Horror or action?
I thought we could kind of take a kind of a mixture, bring a lot of different parts into this last segment, because I don't think there's enough in each one of them to kind of make them their own segment. So I was kind of thinking like action, horror, and maybe even talk about the visuals as well.
Sure. Absolutely. So for me, like, action wise, there's not really too much to this movie. Like, I don't have much to say about action. As far as like horror and visuals go, there's not a ton of it, but whenever it is present in the movie, I think that they did a really good job with it, to be honest. So, there's two different creatures that you see in this movie that are kind of like hybrid creatures. The first being an alligator that's kind of morphed with a shark, I guess, a little bit. And that creature is okay. Like, it's kind of scary because it's the whole idea of Jaws, right? Like, there's a part in the movie where you know it's under the water, but you don't see it. And then when you finally do see it, it's a little startling. But the creature design that I thought they did a really good job with is a creature that you actually see in the trailer, which is the bear. And I don't want to give away necessarily like what it is about the bear, but I will say that it was kind of haunting.
It was my favorite part of the movie.
Oh, for sure. Like the whole scene in the cabin with like this bear creature was really good. And if there was more of that in the Shimmer, I think that I would have come away liking the movie a lot more because it was actually legitimately creepy, I guess you would say.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, it was my favorite part of the movie, and that was actually really effective horror.
Yeah,
like I think there could have been more of that, and it could have turned into like this really great horror film. Like it could have started off as like this sci-fi movie, and then it could have morphed once they got into the Shimmer as this really creepy horror movie. And unfortunately, it didn't really want to be that, and so you really only have that one scene where it's like that. And I think with the music, which we don't really talk about a ton in these reviews, I think the music kind of had a horror feel to it, and so I think you blend the soundtrack with that scene, and I think it would have worked really well if they tried to do it more in this movie. And I'm gonna mirror a lot of what you just said. There's very little action in this movie, and honestly, I feel like even the Shimmer stuff, like the visual stuff, is pretty subtle. Like I think any other filmmaker would have gone batshit crazy with the visuals once they got into the Shimmer. And so I appreciated that he didn't go super over the top, but I would have liked to see a little bit more. Like I thought some of the visuals were cool. I actually thought most of the visuals were cool. And so I would have liked to see more of that, but I guess that's not what he wanted to do. I guess he was afraid to go over the top, like I said. So he kind of went more subtle with it, and I was a little bit disappointed with that.
Gotcha. So you ready to put a cap on this thing with a score?
Yeah, what'd you give it out of 5 stars?
So I think that I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5. So at the end of the day, like I'd recommend watching this movie, even though I don't think I'll ever watch it again, just because there are parts of it that are pretty cool and kind of grab you a little bit. So I'll go with a 3.
I actually originally had a 2.5, but just kind of thinking more about that bear scene, it's really, really cool. And I think because of that and because of the performances, I think I will go with 3 as well, but it's a very, very soft 3.
Cool. So once again,
all right. So what's nerd favorite this week? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying once again, we're on the same page, but we can absolutely move into nerd favorite. So it's my week. And I was on IGN yesterday and they had a poll up that was basically who's your preferred starter Pokemon in the Pokemon games. And so I could have gone the route of asking what your favorite Pokemon was, because I don't think we've done that yet. But instead of doing that, I just want to know, like back in the day, who'd you start with? Or even with the newer games, who'd you start with? So the character I think that I played through a few times and I would start with different characters each time. I would say my preferred out of, I guess you could say 4, because in yellow you can start with Pikachu. But out of the 4, I'd choose Squirtle. I don't know why. It's just I always liked Squirtle's evolution progression, like up to Blastoise. I always thought that was a really cool character. And I want to say that, and I might be a little wrong here, I haven't played these games in forever, but I want to say one of the first gyms you go to is the Rock Gym, which obviously water plays very well against rock, so it was a little bit easier, whereas whenever you start with Charmander, it was a little harder because fire doesn't do so well against the rock Pokemon, so it always made that gym a little bit easier as well.
Yeah, so this is a good question because I've had this conversation with a couple of other people, a couple of my buddies that are big Pokemon players, and I know my buddy Mike, who was formerly of the Obsessive Viewer, is like obsessed with these games, and he always picked the water Pokemon, so Squirtle was one of his favorite. And honestly, I picked the fire, usually almost exclusively when I play these games, I pick the fire Pokemon, and I played, out of all of the games, I would say that I played Red the most. And of course, I picked Charmander, which eventually turns into Charizard, which is probably my favorite Pokemon. If not my favorite, one of my favorite ones. He's just a fucking badass dragon. But like you said, that's a really good point. Especially in Red, like the first couple of gyms are really, really tough with the fire Pokemon. So it did make the game a little bit more difficult. But even with like Sun, which is the most recent, well, I guess Sun Ultra, I guess, is the most recent. But even with Sun, like the Litten, which is basically just this fire kitty cat, is still a pretty cool Pokemon. So I usually exclusively pick the fire Pokemon to start off with. And when I started with Pokemon Go, I started with Charmander as well.
Sorry to bring up bad memories of you having to delete that app off your phone.
Yeah. Yeah, and apparently they're putting more dog Pokemon in the, because I guess it's the year of the dog. I don't know what's going on with that. But yeah, as soon as I delete it, they're like, oh yeah, we're going to put more dogs in this. I was like, you sons of bitches.
Cool, man.
All right, so that is it for episode 178 of the Nerds You're Looking For podcast. As always, we'd appreciate if you subscribe, rate, review us on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, basically any good podcatcher you use, we're on it. You can also check out our website, thenerdspodcast.com. Comment and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Nerds You're Looking For. Check out our Twitch channel. Also follow us on Twitter and Instagram. They're both at The Nerds Podcast. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Google+. You can email us at thenerdsyou'relooking4@gmail.com. And lastly, vote for us for a podcast of the month at podcastland.com. For Patrick Kuhn,
Tyler Hunt.
we are The Nerds You're Looking For. Take it easy, guys.
Later, guys.